All right, I'm back with the awkward interviews, social justice warriors. Today I got Greg McKelvey. Um, he and his wife Kat, an activist and advocate herself, named their kids Stokely and Sojourner. I think that says it all right there. Greg ran Sarah Iannarone's nearly successful overthrow of Mayor Tear Gas Ted Wheeler. I think they were like a few points away from um, a major change that for the city of Portland that would have had ramifications across the country, and much of that success can be attributed to the work Greg did. This man has led protests against police brutality and to defend Black lives. He led Portland Resistance and is today vice chair of the Oregon Democrats Black Caucus, board member of Portland Forward, and board president of Brown Hope. And I could have sworn he used to be a rapper. So as a
Oh
rapper,
my God.
as a rapper myself, I'm going to ask him about that. Um, so, Greg, it's great to have you, man. I've been trying to make this interview happen for a while, and I'm glad we finally got here.
Yo, it's great to be here. And you did your homework. You wrote a better bio for me than I would have wrote. And you pronounced every single thing correctly. You got Ianarone right, which is not easy. That means I know you had to do your homework.
Yeah, that is a tough one, man. So let's start off with your upbringing. How did you get to this point? What was your radicalization? How did you go from, uh, you know, being a Portland resident to being a Portland leader?
Yeah, I grew up in a middle class house. Mom's white, dad's black. My dad's a teacher, my mom's a lawyer. We were never rich by any means, but we definitely were also, I mean, like, there was food to eat, but my parents worked so hard that I had to cook it myself. So it was still the top ramen because it was all I knew how to make. But like we didn't have all these hungry nights or anything. And I just, you know, I'm the youngest of I think six. And and I was a bad kid, like basically. I started like smoking pot in like eighth grade and just being bad, and you know, stealing a bag of chips from the stores, not because I necessarily needed a bag of chips, because I like to steal a bag of chips from the stores, like little petty 13-year-old stuff that a lot of 13-year-olds end up going to jail or killed by the police for eventually. And then, just most of my peers or my best friends and stuff, because we went to a school in Oregon. Obviously, it's not extremely black, but all the black kids hang out together. And most of my friends were pretty poor, etc. And like, I was one of the only ones to like after high school go to college, which it didn't really like strike me or anything. It was just, it felt like, yeah, I'm like the leader of this little crew, so like it makes sense I would go to college. I had no idea what my major was going to be. And then in my freshman year of college, my best friend died of an accidental overdose on pills. And then I was like, man, I got to get like my life together and basically try and live for like both of us. um and he, was one of the smartest people I know. He wasn't an activist, but he would always like give me books and be like, you got to read this. And I'm like, bro, I know you didn't read this, but whatever. I'll read this. He gave me like one of Malcolm Gladwell's books, etc. But from there, around that time, freshman year of college would have been Obama's 2012 run. So uh I was into that, I guess, just like into politics as sport, like I liked watching the debates, and I liked just talking about theory. One of my first classes before I had declared a major was political theory, and we read Karl Marx and Adam Smith and all like the super basics. And from there I was like, I want to read all theory there is. So I started like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and I've read like my bookshelf is all, people are like, have you read this new book? I'm like, no, I literally just go straight to the source. Like someone asked me yesterday, have you read Young Stalin? And I was like, no, I just read Stalin. Like I'll just read the actual person's writings. You know, I should be reading, I guess that's the next step because I'm running out of things to read. But that's what I like to do, is read like the actual people's theory, etc. So I was just into that. And you know, I've sort of naturally always not necessarily been a leader, but always been like, you know, the person who decides where you and all your friends are going to go eat when you're like all hanging out, right? Like that was like all, you know, there's always like that person that's kind of like that. The person on the dorm floor who like decides what time we get to cut off music or something like that. You know, maybe I'm just bossy, I don't know. And so I wasn't radical then. I was just really into politics. But at that moment, you know, people were really getting involved with student government in my college, Oregon State. And I was like, you know, I'm reading like people that are like the greatest people in the history of the world. I'm like, I don't want to get involved in student government. Like, why would I? I'm an adult. Why can't I just get involved in government? So when I declared as a political science major, we had to do an internship running a campaign or working on a campaign. And it was just me and one other person running this campaign for the Benton County Commissioner, which is the county that we were in at the time, that Oregon State was in, Corvallis. And so I worked on that race, learned all the basics of how to run a campaign. It was really great. You know, it's a perfect size place. Your vote count is like 20,000. So it's like, you canvassing matters, you know, knocking on doors matters, but you still have to do all the like groundwork and stuff. And we won. And that led me to, because I was basically like assistant campaign manager, to be able to take all these jobs as campaign managers throughout while I was in college. And then when I graduated, people said, the only thing that you can do with a political science degree is go to law school, which is a lie. If anybody's listening to this, don't do it. I would never do that again. But I went to law school because I was told that's the only thing that you can do. And so when I go to law school in Portland, now I'm in this radical, like, not radical, but in a scene where there are activists, right? And at the same time, it's coinciding with like the not Michael Brown dying, but when Darren Wilson, when they said they weren't going to charge him, and I'm still running campaigns, and it's like hitting me like, wait, activists and the politicians I'm working for are all talking about the same stuff, and they aren't talking to each other. They don't like each other. They're like, it's like we're having these siloed conversations talking about the same stuff. Why are politicians, and I had this like idealist idea that, you know, I have yet to proven right, but I do think it's the direction we're headed in, where I think that activism and politics need to fuse, and have fused on the right. I mean, we saw it with the Tea Party, and then the election of Donald Trump, and I think we've seen it on the left a little bit with like AOC, where politics is she's an activist, right? She's an organizer, and so you know, because of that, it led me to try and connect with all these activists, get activists endorsing my candidates as opposed to just the basic elected leaders and stuff. And like, to be honest, it was not the best strategy. I thought it was brilliant because, you know, on social media, the activists are all I'm seeing and stuff, but the people of Portland are seeing the nightly news. And so I realized eventually, you know, protests and stuff, you know, was something that I could lead and something that I could do and wanted to be involved in, and that politics had to be involved in, but that, you know, there was missing ingredients on how we could turn these protests into political success. So
Yeah.
that's sort of like my journey, right, from being a bad kid smoking pot to running protests and then running campaigns, you
Yeah.
know.
It's interesting. You know, I also was a bad kid, and I think kind of the same the same energy and you know, I don't know what the right word is, but like not giving a fuck attitude that works when you're a kid and taking risks, like being a graffiti artist, stealing from a store, which is obviously ignorant, stealing from a small business, but you're testing boundaries. It's the same kind of emotional charge, I guess, that leads certain people to take risks for good causes, like direct actions and things like that. I also think
that's a great point. I've never thought about that. That's a great point.
Yeah, and so I definitely want to touch. I want to talk more about your thoughts on protest and how we can make them. The cat attacking my computer.
Oh no.
Yeah. Thank my wife for that. And also what you said about, not necessarily these connections working between activists and politicians, and what the potential there is. But before we get to that, since you mentioned theory and reading like the original writings and all of this stuff, I'm curious how something that was written decades or centuries ago can be applied to some of the political strategizing that you might do today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it can't. And this is something that I think a lot of, Marxists or even anarchists are unwilling to sort of admit. We even, or I'll use I statements. I could not have predicted where the world would be now 10 years ago, right? So there's no reason for me to think that Karl Marx necessarily could have done that. Hey, Katie, that Karl Marx could have did that, 200 years ago or whatever. So, but a lot of it has to do with human nature, and these are just smart people putting words down, right? And so, I think the human nature aspects we can learn from, and how people have built upon, Marx was not the first person to come up with the things that Marx was talking about. Lenin had a lot of writings and what is to be done and stuff like that, that build upon other theories, and also just reading the correspondence between people like Trotsky or Lenin and stuff like that. I think, but so I don't think that's the path, right? Like, I think we can get to a really good place in society without people doing, like, I don't think everybody should be doing this theory work, right? Because I think that we sometimes turn off everyday people by talking so much about political theory. Like, when I had a tweet at some point where somebody was like, called me an Antifa anarchist or something like that. And I was like, look, I'm firmly anti-fascist. There's nothing, this should not be controversial. I'm not an anarchist, I'm a communist. And that tweet definitely came back to bite me. But when people would come back and ask me, like, you had this tweet, it was just a reply to some random tweet. Like, it was the only time I had ever publicly said this. It was like from years ago when I was probably like 23. I would not have tweeted it today. But when people would ask me, I would be like, yeah, I think workers should own the means of production. Like, do you not? And that's not all of Marxism, right? Or communism or something like that. But that's all, that's the gist. I mean, not the gist of it, but that's the core of it. Right. And so, I think that's the level we have to engage people with. But I do think that different people got to do different things, right? And this is a big part of activism that has been frustrating for me, is that everybody wants to do the same thing, right? Like, everybody wants to be the person on the megaphone. Everybody wants to be the person talking to the news. Everybody wants to be the person that goes viral, as if that stuff is fun or worth a lot, right? Like that, you might get a rush out of that for a little bit, like, and then when the threats start coming and the hate starts coming and people want to cancel you because you said the wrong thing at the wrong time, and I'm not talking about like really bad, horrible, racist stuff. I'm talking about like you had the wrong protest tactic at the wrong time, so people want to cancel you, So like So, basically, I think we don't have to have everybody reading theory, but I do think that it's important for some people to be doing it because we do have a problem in activist scenes where, one, we allow for the whitewashing of the history of civil rights movements, etc. As we see, I mean, we just had Martin Luther King Day, and every Republican in the world is tweeting about how much they love Martin Luther King. It's like, this was not that long ago. Literally your parents, if not you, opposed him at the time. And so it's yeah, I guess that's a long-winded answer, but I think I got to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I see too in in activist circles. What the first thing you said, that those who are obsessed with theory and are closed off to modern realities have a really difficult time being effective and reaching people. Um,
Hmm.
and you're I think, however, like you said, though, there is a lot to be learned if it can be properly translated by understanding what is going on now and the relationship that these core kind of concepts have to present day life. You know,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion amongst people. Like when we saw that phenomenon of people that voted for Obama and then voted for Trump, right? And certainly saw a lot of people vote for Trump and then vote for Biden. We saw a lot of people vote for Bernie in the primary and then vote for Trump in the general.
yeah,
And for people who are involved and understand the politics of things, it's like, how could you ever do that, right? But that's not, we have to realize that we have these, on this political spectrum, that it's far more complicated than this, but for this purposes, we have this political spectrum where we have, like, us over on the left. I don't know if that's your left or whatever, but us on the left, the bad guys on the right. Both of those are very small percentages, right, of the population, right, that are really involved, that really care, that really understand it, etc. Most everybody else is somewhere in the middle, and not only are they in the middle, but they don't identify as any of these things, and they can sway with the wind.
yeah,
And they're most likely never going to be firmly in one camp. They can sway with the wind. And we saw, this is one thing about, the history and theory of people. I mean, in the Mexican Revolution, you had people literally turn from populists to reactionaries, based on small different things. It's and so, because of that, we have to meet people where they are, and we have to be that wind that pushes people in the right direction. And I think, we found a good recipe on just talking about the things that affect people's lives. So I think, part of the reason Trump lost the election was he was callous about the coronavirus that was killing hundreds of thousands of people. Like, that impacted people's lives. I think as Democrats focus on healthcare, something that is like tangibly matters to people's lives, raising the minimum wage, although $15 is ridiculous. I mean, we've been fighting for $15 since I was 15 years old. But raising the minimum wage, healthcare, the stimulus checks, these kinds of things, like, it's not handouts, but it's like things that have a tangible difference in people's lives are what can sway people from one end to the other of what can this philosophy or group of people do for me. And that's what becomes so frustrating with the Democrats, as we alienate people who could potentially turn into bad guys. I think a lot of people that we saw end up in the streets as Proud Boys or as Boogaloo Boys or something like that, they were in the wrong internet forum. For many of these people, the wrong person was the one that reached out to them and had a one-on-one conversation, and it could have been me, it could have been you instead, and they could have been on the left. And so I think that's why it's important to meet people where they are, not bombard them with theory, but really, like, would you having healthcare impact your life? Would you getting a stimulus check impact your life? Would ICE being abolished impact your life? Like,
yeah,
and those kinds of things are where we really need to focus. And as much as I really disliked Trump, at a certain point, like, I come to the exception that he is going to be president for those 4 years. And I felt like we did way too much as Democrats. Like, I'm obviously a Democrat, but did way too much just focusing on Trump the personality when he was going to be there no matter what, and not on policies that were going to impact people's lives, or pointing out the policies he was doing that were hurting people's lives.
Totally. And that brings me to what is like the big news story right now, which is the impeachment trial. I think it's
So,
interesting that that so much focus, time, energy, media minutes, and money is being spent on impeaching someone that's already not president, as if, adding to the stain on his record will prevent a future Trump, a more intellectual, a more sophisticated, a better looking, a younger, a smarter, fascist, racist down the road.
mhm.
What are your thoughts on, you know, whether the impeachment trial is a good use of time, if it's a distraction, because so much that Biden promised isn't happening, so much that he didn't even promise because he knew better, because he knew he wasn't going to do it, but things that we need are not happening. Um, you know, is what are your thoughts on what is happening, what is taking up Congress's time versus what they could be spending their time on?
Yeah, I think for Trump, I do think that there is a bit of we need some accountability, right? We can't let it just be like, oh, what he did was okay, and there's gonna be no consequences. But I think impeachment, the fact that he was impeached, and not convicted, is probably, I think most people admit, the most consequences we're gonna get for that. Like, we're probably not gonna win this trial. So in that sense, just strategically, it's not a good use of time because we're not gonna win, right? And I think, where it hurts is there is a group of, I mean, most Democrats, not most Democrats, a big hefty portion of Democrats do not need, or at least are not worried that much about whether they're going to get $2,000 or $1,400 or something like that, right? But they are the resistance, and they want to stick it to Trump. Like, so there is a group of Democrats that obviously would be the most privileged part of our party because they don't need $2,000. Who, if you ask them which they would rather have, they would pick impeaching Trump. And I think that's where the problem lies, rather than with our Senate and Congress. Like, I think they are doing one, I think it was okay for Congress to impeach him in the first place. That was quick. That was, it didn't take away from a lot of work. We were, Joe Biden was just about to get started, etc. But I do think, now as we're trying to pass legislation, it seems like a waste of time. So
Yeah.
I, it's been frustrating for this entire 4 years that, as much as, I think arguing that Trump was fascist and bad and racist and really bad for our country in general, and just polarizing us and breaking down our institutions that I think we're going to need going forward. The That we spent too much time focusing on him rather than policy. And he did a lot of bad policies, and we should have focused on them. The tax cuts for the rich, I mean, that was a huge deal. And deregulation of things that could affect climate, is a huge deal. And, not, in trying to, and in some ways dismantling Obamacare, those are big deals.
Yeah. And the other point you made in your last comment about a Boogaloo Boy or Proud Boy just having had one too many bad conversations, or getting attention from the wrong side, I think is a really important point too. I'm obviously firmly anti-fascist and anti-racist, um, and I'm not going to join the very radical small section of the left that was cheering on the January 6th rioters, or whatever you want to call them. They peacefully waltzed into the Capitol building, hand in hand with the cops. So rioters really isn't the appropriate term, but those were a combination of racists and fascists and chauvinists and people who supported Trump, who believed that he was actually popularly elected. And I believe that honestly, the corporations and many of our politicians and the system itself, the capitalist system, the way our governments are structured, are significantly responsible for the problems that face all working class and poor people of all colors and, on both sides of the aisle. But since these people were not protesting to improve the lives of the most oppressed, and were there to potentially murder Black and brown elected officials, I'm not going to cheer them on. But at the same time, as an abolitionist, I am not certain that every single one of those people, in fact, I'm certain of the opposite, that every one of those people needs to be incarcerated for life and they're inherently and forever a terrible person. I believe that, and has been proven by Nazis who have changed and started working to change other Nazis, that through transformative reparative justice, education, mediation, community service, these people can learn, can change their thinking and realize the ills of their ways, and with that same passion and bravery that we talked about in the beginning, use that for a positive cause.
Mhm. I,
So I was going to
I,
ask you, like, what do you think about what has been going on in terms of the response to the individuals who were there?
Yeah, I was actually asked this on a radio station the other day where they said, do you think everybody who was at the Capitol should go to jail? Basically, what you're saying, and I said, not if they, didn't commit a crime. I mean, they have a right to protest. Not everybody stormed the Capitol, so they're not all responsible for what happened once everybody went into the Capitol. In terms of conversion, again, I think the different sides of our political spectrum are so small, and while that might have been the energy of Trump's election, and that was way too many people, and it's very scary, in the terms of America, right, they're very unpopular in their very small segment, and that is actually true, I think, of the left as well. So I think it's possible and important work, and reformed. We've seen this from people that get out of jail and joined white supremacist gangs, and then try and convert others and stuff. I think that's possible and good, and I don't think people are necessarily should be just like tossed away. But I do think our focus should be on the vast majority of people that, you know, are not even politicized enough to maybe even know much about the sixth. I mean, it's so we are so entrenched in these bubbles, where whenever I have my TV on, it's on the news if I'm not watching sports. And whenever and on Twitter, everything I'm seeing is about politics, etc., like this and that. But most of the friends I grew up with, like if I told them January 6th, they'd be like, what happened on January 6th? Like, and I think that blows the mind of a lot of people in the country.
Right.
So yeah.
All right. So you've said, as someone who's led protests, but I think now has moved more toward strategizing from within, trying to elect more Cory Bushes, so to speak. You know, you've said two really interesting things on recent interviews. You said, if the world is ending, some people are going to act like it. It's amazing to me that liberal Democrats really do believe that we are on the brink of something like Armageddon, and then are shocked that some people behave like it. On the other hand, you also said when you break a bank's window, the CEO doesn't come to clean it up. Someone from the working class does. Two really great points that I wouldn't consider them contradictory. They're more thoughtful about the full reality of what protest entails and whether it can be effective and who is impacted. So, as someone who believes in a multi-pronged approach, I believe that we need sustained protest. I believe that we would benefit greatly by a general strike. Having concrete demands for why we're protesting and why we're striking, and then also working from within the system to elect better representatives. I think for me personally, that's something we need to maintain all of those different systems and mechanisms and approaches. What are your thoughts today overall on the protest movement and the value, and then what is your response to someone who says, you know, elected officials that we believe are our future end up caving in and succumbing to the, to the general Democratic Party alignment, the Cory Bushes, the Rashidas and AOC who voted to keep Nancy Pelosi in power.
Mhm. I think that it's right to say that most of the time the politicians that we work to elect on the left disappoint us at different points in time. Um, so I think we have to start with the things that are non-negotiable and like that we're not going to argue, right? So the one of them is that that the world is on the brink of chaos, not just because of the rise of fascism and white nationalism, etc., but also climate chaos, in which, maybe the world isn't going to like snap and disappear in however many years, but we are headed towards, a lot of climate refugees. And if you just think about how big the Syrian refugee crisis is, but on a global scale, food shortages, water shortages, etc., we're looking at a lot of pain and death in our very near future. Um, and so if we accept that as a fact, and then we think, okay, another fact is we should try and avoid that, right? So then it's like, okay, so what can we do to try and avoid that? And nothing that anybody has done so far, I can point to and say, has really done that, right? Whether it's breaking windows, whether it's electing the AOCs of the world, right? So I'm betting on one of these in part because I'm better at it, in stuff. But I can't go to somebody who's breaking a window and say, no, my way is the way that works, because it hasn't worked yet. I'm betting that it will. I wouldn't tell you that, and I'm betting that I will because it's the only bet that I have, right? Like I have two options, right? It's like, but it's very likely that neither of these methods work, and we lose to capitalism. Like that's not impossible, right? Like how MLK said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I don't agree with that. It at least doesn't naturally bend towards justice. And we've been bending towards chaos for a very long time here. And so I guess that makes me sound pessimistic, but in terms of protests, not every protest has to accomplish everything, and not every protest has to look the same, and not every protest has to have the same goals. And this is one of the things that I think people who are not necessarily on the sidelines, but are more observers of protests than leading them or participating in them, is when they see the mass, like in Portland, we had these mass protests, 10,000 people for nights on end, Damian Lillard at the front of the march, etc. Like liberals, anarchists, communists, socialists, probably some never Trumpers, like all like literally together for Black lives, right? And I think that is when Portland was at its best. at that moment, our city council defunded 20-something million from the police department. I'd love to talk about defunding too at
Yeah,
some
we're
point,
getting
because
there.
so at some point we defunded 20-something million from the police department, because we had these massive protests. It was like they had, I mean, I was running the campaign, so we had polls to show us the protesters were popular, very popular. Um, we also had polls to show us that defund the police was not popular. But and then eventually that, I guess it didn't become smaller protests, but eventually instead of that, what we were having was small protests of a few dozen, less than 100 people that were more radical and would often lead to like property destruction. I can't sit here and say that necessarily one is like way more effective than the other. I tend to think the larger one that was less radical was more effective because I can point to a tangible thing we got from it. But I don't think I don't think that whatever one out of every 10 million windows in Portland has been broken. I just don't think that that is that big of a deal. And it's like, if we're picking the things, there's only 24 hours in the day. And if we're going to pick the things we're going to care about, talk about, and work on, for somebody to look at all of the things wrong in the world and pick the defense of windows as their cause just seems inhumane to me, right? Like, so I'm not gonna break a window. I don't think it helps us necessarily. I can understand what would lead someone to break a window, but I also just like I'm not gonna cry over a window, but I will cry when so a person that looks like me is killed in my community or somewhere else, right? And so that just matters so much more to me. So if somebody seems to prioritize those windows, that person I don't think shares a lot of politics with me
Yeah,
or priorities. Yeah.
and absolutely. And there's a reason that they call it broken windows policing, and that is the false um ow, Jesus, sorry. That is the false premise that um things that don't look pretty lead to violence, essentially, and that it is not actually lack of social services, lack of education, lack of healthcare, and all of the things that truly cause crime to be a necessity, are actually the causes. So then you also have the fact that the police, the entire system, is intended for a couple reasons. One of them being the further enslavement of Black people and other people of color, and the criminalization of certain segments of our society to maintain a profit system, and also to protect property over people. So the people who are arguing that this window is so important, they, of course, like you said, they don't share morals and values in politics with us, but that stance is far from surprising. But I think the way you put it is really eloquent, that you're going to cry over someone who looks like you being murdered more than you're going to fret over a window being broken. For me, breaking a lot of windows of corporate headquarters and banks can strike fear in the power holders. And when you do that, and that's all you do, I agree, it's not going to be effective. But if you do that along with all of the other things that you're doing, demanding a seat at a table with actual demands, and it's not the same person who's at the table as the person breaking the windows, you can do what Malcolm X and MLK were able to do, knowingly or not, which was to say, if you don't pass some civil rights laws, we're going to have a lot more armed Black people scaring you on the streets. We're going to feed our own communities, clothe and educate and provide healthcare to our own communities, and your businesses will suffer.
So,
Go ahead.
so two points. One is a bit of pushing you on one part, and then the other is something else. So, I'll start with the first one that I think we agree on. That can't work if the people breaking the windows are trying to cancel the people who don't break windows for not being pure enough, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's one of the big problems where the radical elements, we talk about diversity of tactics, but the people who say that are trying to defend the more radical tactics, and it's never used to defend what is seen as the less radical tactics. And instead, those people are often trying to cancel people like me for, not being radical enough, right? Not breaking enough windows. And then the other thing is, I agree that, maybe breaking a lot of bank windows would strike fear into them. I don't necessarily know if then, we can make a logical leap to that, meaning somebody gets a seat at a table. And I also think it's possible, and I don't know the answer, but I think it's possible, and I think I believe this, that that I don't want to sound like the liberal, but I'll play this part. That these people in the middle that can be pushed one way or the other, we might be completely alienating them. And I've said this point before, and people say, well, if they care that much about a window, they were never going to be an ally in the first place. And I think that assumption is so wrong, because it's assuming that those people could have not moved in the right direction, and it's assuming that segment of society who does really not like to see broken windows, or doesn't understand the issues that we're fighting over because it doesn't impact them, that person is incapable of being on our side. And even if they were, we still don't have enough numbers without them. We need them.
Yes, I agree completely. And also, that's why I was careful to say that the people at the table are not the same people as those breaking windows.
Yeah.
Because it's not like the people who go to the table say, my co-chair of my organization was out breaking windows last night, right? Like, the people who are in power know why the windows are being broken, and they're more likely to sit down with someone who's not breaking the windows because of
Yeah.
it.
You're right. Yep.
So let's close out by talking about Portland specifically, police brutality, police mass incarceration, and the thoughts about defunding and abolition. I just want to point out, for those that aren't aware, that like many cities in this country, Portland is no different. Black people are arrested at a 430% greater rate and are murdered at a 390% greater rate. You have, a district attorney who was elected by, I believe, the largest margin in the nation's history among DA races, and ran on a more progressive platform, certainly, than the prior DA or most DAs preceding him anywhere else in the country. When I interviewed Mike Schmidt, actually, it was the first interview I did for this series. The results were pretty pronounced. It resulted in both of us receiving death threats. It resulted in Andy No writing an article about us and many tweets about us. Mike feared for his life, and may still. I haven't talked to him in the last couple weeks, but feared for his life ever since. And what he experienced was far worse than what I did. But being interviewed even by someone that Andy called an Antifa militant was enough to galvanize all of the Proud Boys and their friends against Mike as like the leader of the destruction of Portland, and like one of the heads of this radical leftist movement, when in reality he's compared to someone like me, he's pretty moderate. And at the same time, I'm constantly receiving communications from leftists saying Mike is not doing enough. Mike's not saving my friend who was arrested at this protest or whatever. And as someone who, for those who don't know, I live in New York. I follow Portland because I think it's a really important city in our movement. I follow Portland because I love the city of Portland. It's a beautiful, incredible, culturally diverse place. And I follow Mike because I've been his friend for 20 years and have been trying to push him left for as long as I've known him. So my, Bobin Singh said, he's the the head of the Oregon Justice Resource Center. He said, we're trying to help push back against the narratives being developed around Mike being the cause of Portland's death. And I'm not sure if he meant from moderates or just from Republicans. But Mike can only do so much. And as I mentioned, the police violence, the mass arrests are way more significant than could be addressed by a mere $20 million reduction in the police budget. So my question for you is, what do you think the current state of Portland is today, given policing, given Mike's position as DA? Where is the movement to defund the police? And what are your thoughts on defunding in general versus a movement like the one that I co-created called 10 Demands to consider defunding as merely step one on the road to full abolition?
Yeah, I'll start with Mike and then go to defund. So Mike is definitely much better than we've ever had in Portland. But people have to understand how powerful and how scary our police union is here in Portland. Like deadly scary. And how right wing they are. And so it's it's hard because it, people don't understand he can't just go in there and just snap of the finger do everything he wants, right? Like um uh, or else, because that's not how politics work, he can't burn all of his political capital on your friend in his first year, and then not be able, and then be hindered from taking the massive reforms that he could possibly take in 4 years. I think Portland's criminal justice system will be better off after however many terms Mike Schmidt has than it was when he came in, and I think that's worth something. um the on defunding, so I consider myself an abolitionist in the sense that in my ideal world we would not have armed police members patrolling the world, right? Like I don't see a point for it. I think that most of the crimes that people are in jail for, they should not be in jail for. I think there's a very small percentage of people in the world, less than one, some people say 4%, that are just, something is, they're willing to inflict pain on people, or people that are sick and do serial killers and stuff like that. I mean, in Portland, we had the Jeremy Christian attack on the Max train where he, murdered 2 individuals. I don't want that person out on the street. So we haven't figured out the restorative justice aspect for, crimes such as, vicious sexual assault or, racist murders, etc. But I'm sure that's, one of the steps on the way to abolition. But I like how you frame that defunding. To me, only makes sense if it's on the way to abolition, because otherwise I will be saddened that that ended up being the call for this movement, because it was very polarizing and pulled badly. We knew that in the campaign, and that's why we always said we wanted to reallocate funds from the militarized policing of Portland and put them back into communities. That makes a way worse chant and a way worse sign. We're saying the same thing, but it comes from an austerity mindset, which is something that I don't think we should have, right? It comes from a zero sum mindset of let's take money from the police and put it into the stuff we need. That should never be how we think about government, because the money exists. If we need money somewhere, we should put that money somewhere, regardless of if we have to take it from somewhere else or not, right? So I think that's not a very great argument systemically for the entire country of why we should defund, because there's not enough money and the money would be better spent here. That's how people with an austerity mindset talk, and that's not how we should be framing issues, or we're going to lose things like Social Security or the post office, etc. And then the other thing is, I have very little data, and I actually am very skeptical that taking $20 million from the Portland Police Department will make any police officer less violent. Like, I don't think there's going to be a point where they pulled their gun and they're like, well, I would have shot this Black person in the back, but we've been defunded $20 million. And so I have one less clip on me or something. Like it doesn't make sense. Or like, they were able to buy less tear gas maybe. So like, if they don't have a gun, they're going to hit you with a baton. If they don't have a tank, they're going to hit you with a car. Like, if they don't have, any of the tools at their disposal, they're going to use some other tool to still be violent. It's not money that made policing broken. It was policing as an institution itself. And so the notion that we could in any place say, let's take 20% of or $20 million and now the police department is better, that to me makes no sense. It only makes sense if we're chipping away all the way to the point where they are non-existent, right? But the problem is, I don't necessarily know if that's what most people mean when they say defund the police, or if that's what most people are hearing when they hear defund the police. So there's a little bit of a gap there that, I'm worried about. And then there's the other thing, some people want to defund the police because they want to poke them, because they're pissed and they want to do something to the police that, they've been harming us, let's harm them, right? And I think that's a little human nature, and like, I'm not going to cry over that either, right? Whatever. I don't care if the Portland police have $20 million taken from them. I care if we take $20 million from the Portland police and then say, well, that'll fix it. Their budget is back at 2016 levels, when they were just as racist, just as brutal, just as disparate in their policing of communities of colors as they are now. So I'm glad that what you're doing is what you're doing, because I think it's the only honest way that defunding the police makes sense. I'm skeptical, not that that's a good goal. I'm skeptical that I know for a fact, like, a majority of Portlanders right now would not go along with defunding on the way to abolition, right? But the Overton window always moves, and that's an important part of this work as well. And there are things, like, even in my lifetime, like marriage equality, that when I started paying attention to politics were not popular, and now it's like, even Republicans, it's like, of course, like, why would I care if two guys want to get married? Like, so I'm not gonna say never. I am gonna say not right now, because I've seen the polls for Portland, right? Like, so but I love that that's what you're doing, because I think that's the only way defunding makes sense. And I think we had a lot of energy in the streets towards defunding, and I will be saddened if it did not result in an end goal, because right now what we got was 20 million taken from the Portland police, and it has made no difference in policing, other than when people actually do need the police in our society right now. Unfortunately, the police tell them, sorry, we can't do that because our resources have been taken, which is a lie. So that's my answer. And I don't ever want to be like in the position where I'm like, whatever the call of the day is, like, no, you guys are chanting the wrong thing, we should be asking for something else. I think part of it is we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Like, I think we really could have, and I know people feel different ways about the rollout of DeRay's like 8 can't wait stuff, but like, I do think we could have just knocked those out the park real quick, like at the beginning of the movement, and then moved on to something else too. Like, it didn't have to stand in the way of defunding the police at all. And I think we might have missed that opportunity in some jurisdictions because we were too focused on defunding, and that either didn't happen in those places, or if it did, we still are going to have racist policing. So But I'm a firm believer that the people that are called to each moment are the people that should be leading that moment, right? Like, so that's why when this new protest movement popped up, I could have showed up to the first organic protest with a megaphone and led the marches, right? Like, but instead I saw who was and wanted to mentor those people, let them know what I know. The simplest things of maybe you don't want to turn down this one-way street, or this looks like the police are about to kettle you, like things that there's no textbook for, and I had to learn just on my own, or this is the type of day where we are going to see arrest type of thing, like that. I think I want people to know, but I don't want to dictate how people who are called to specific moments are responding to those moments, because if you were so passionate by George Floyd or something like that, that it's what first brought you into the streets or something, then I do think that you should be at the forefront because this is your cause.
Yeah. All of that really well said, man. I don't think that I need to add much to the defunding abolition conversation. In regard to the last thing you said, I noticed you said that at another point as well, and that stood out to me. I think one thing that separates you from a lot of people, no matter what field it is, or no matter what side of the political world they come from, is that you, I believe you genuinely are about the cause, are about positive change, about substantive change. And while some may question, whether you should be taking the tactics you're taking, I don't think anyone can question your integrity or, your lack of ego. When you talk about taking the time to mentor those who are leading a current moment and movement, as opposed to demanding your place back at the forefront. I really appreciate and respect that. We're at an hour, which is what I promised you. Before I let you go, tell me, because whenever I do an interview, at least when I was more focused on hip hop and less on activism, they always made me freestyle, which I'm not going to do to you. I want you to quickly tell me what you used to go by as a rapper and what you used to rap about, because
I
one of the ways that I do what I do is through music. My song 10
yeah,
Demands is about
yeah,
abolition.
I saw it. Yeah. Um, well, I was not rapping about abolition, I'll tell you that
Okay.
much.
All right.
I used my name, just my name,
Okay.
and it was part of, it was mostly when I was in like high school and stuff, just a way to have an outlet, but also, to try and be cool. And I grew up as an actor. I would be in like plays and stuff when I was a kid, and I I liked the mic, and I liked performing and stuff, and that, eventually led me to be a good public speaker. But um, it I think that for anybody to like really take it super serious, it has to be a passion of yours. And I don't think it was really necessarily a passion of mine. What was a passion of mine was having a voice, and I've found a way to use that voice, and I think a more effective way, because I don't think I was writing very good stuff about abolition. I was writing about dancing and I don't know,
Yeah.
smoking pot and stuff
The
like
stuff
that.
that
But
you were focused on at the time. But like you
yeah,
said, it's the same, using your voice,
yeah.
and using a microphone, uh, the same passion that went into that, you've translated to something that you do have this, the real passion for, and you feel is more effective.
Yep, and I built, not a huge platform, but when I basically switched into being an activist, I had almost 10,000 Twitter followers or something. And, so like, had I had not ever done that, been making music or something, I wouldn't have had that initial platform to be able to be heard on anything. So it definitely helped in that sense. And I think that's something that we take for granted in activist spaces is the platforms that people have and what that's worth. In politics, people really buy people's lists, and stuff like that. And that's basically what a Twitter following is. And so it is like anybody's Twitter following is literally worth, money. And so I think those platforms, and that's why I hate when we start, eating our own or trying to cancel people, etc. Because if somebody has built a platform, it's better to help them use that platform towards good than to not. Somebody was getting canceled on the internet yesterday for a stupid tweet, but they had 50,000 followers. And I was telling one of the people tweeting about them that they're not perfect, but they don't deserve to just have to be canceled right now. And they said, well, basically, you're right, they're not perfect, but what they basically did was run into a burning building without any of the training on how to work in a burning building. And I was like, yeah, and it's better to try and get that person out the burning building than it is to yell at them for how stupid they are for running into the building. So yeah, I think platforms are great. I'm glad you have one. I'm glad I have one, and that we hopefully get to use them to move this conversation forward and to move our society towards something better than where it is right now.
100%. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right. Peace.
Peace.